Well, this is our third and final part for week 7 on the passive voice. We are considering passive forms outside of the indicative mode in chapter 24, section 2. We've always taken a little time to review, and I will do the same here. And also, I must admit that I'm never always forgetting to mark where I stopped. So that's part of the equation too. But I think it is not a wrong thing to preempt some of your questions or things that I might have skipped over in the previous lesson. So I'll try to push this through rather quickly. Our look at passive forms outside of the infinitives, outside of the indicative mood, which was chapter 24, section 1. In section 24.2, we already talked about the subjunctive passive. We also have passive infinitives. Here's a comparison between the present passive infinitive lu esthai, to be loosed, and the aorist passive infinitive luthenai, to be loosed. We cannot make a distinction in English between these two tenses, present and aorist infinitives, because we are outside of the indicative mood, and we do not have the augment with the aorist, so it is not clear if it is past time. Or perhaps the point is more to relate information as a whole, rather than being inside the story and telling the story, or seeing it as an ongoing, as we called it, imperfective action. Imperfective action includes the present tense and the imperfect tense, usually. Perfective action, action that has been completed, generally includes primarily the aorist tense, and to a degree the future tense. The future tense uses the future periphrastic participle in order to be sure to convey continuous action in the future. But back again to the subject. The future passive infinitive is luthes esthai, and the perfect passive infinitive is lelus thai. The perfect passive infinitive to have been loosed, and I've made a note here that there are actually no future passive infinitives in the New Testament. I'm not even sure how he translated in the English, the future passive infinitive, but I forgot to consider it. But since we don't have any forms like that, it's not a problem for us. But this is what it would look like. Thes, and actually we can start right now, because next week we consider the future tense. The future passive, the sign of the future passive is theta eta sigma, just like the sign of the future of the aorist tense is theta eta, at least theta, often theta eta. The sign of the future passive is theta eta sigma, luthes esthai, whatever that would be in English. So we have to be loosed, present infinitive passive, to be loosed, aorist infinitive passive, and to have been loosed, the perfect infinitive passive. Let's look at this more with examples. Here is a chart or a table from Dr. McIver's textbook or Dr. McIver's material, which places the present infinitive passive and the aorist infinitive passive and the perfect infinitive passive next to each other, or over and under each other, to be loosed, to have been loosed. Again, we cannot distinguish here between the present and the aorist infinitive passive voice because we're outside of the indicative mode. So we don't know if the aorist is perfective action. Has the action been completed? And would we translate it somehow with the past tense? We don't know because we have no context for it. It's the context that determines the tense in our English translations. Let's take some examples from Luke 23, verse 32. We have first an indicative passive from ago, egonto, de. Now there were led away also others, other criminals, kakorgoi, other duo, two other criminals with him, with Jesus, sun auto, anareth thenai. This verb means an aireo. An aireo means, remember the verb aireo. It's close to the verb airo, which means to lift up or to take away. Aireo means to execute to someone, to put to death someone. And so we have here the aorist infinitive passive of this verb, an airethenai. Notice theta eta is sign of the aorist passive, and it's a passive infinitive. Now there were led away two other criminals with him to be put to death. And it's interesting that we're told two other criminals, as Jesus is being treated as a transgressor. So he is also being treated as a criminal here, even though he never sinned, he carried our sins. In Matthew 18, verse 9, we have an aorist passive infinitive. And Jesus is talking about if your eye, kai e ophthalmos su, if your eye causes you to stumble, skandalize, it is causing you to stumble, present tense. Pull it out, ex ele auton, the imperative, and bale, throw it. This is also imperative. We'll look at those. We'll notice, though, that we have an aorist infinitive imperative because bal only has one lambda. I'm talking about here, this word bale. This is the aorist stem. So this must be an aorist imperative. And throw it away from you. It is good one-eyed into life to enter rather than two eyes having echonta, which is also a participle, but we're interested in this aorist passive participle, aorist passive infinitive, sorry, to be thrown, to be cast. This is balo, but the aorist infinitive passive, the theta eta, is the sign of the past aorist passive. Lethenai, to be cast, to be thrown. The action happens to the eyes. So the eyes are the subject, and the verb to be cast. The eyes to be thrown. Having the one having two eyes. To to be thrown into the hell of fire. Gehenna was the garbage pit where everything was burned, the valley of Hinnom in Jerusalem, and that is a picture of hell in the New Testament. Gehenna, because Greeks have so much problem saying Hebrew names, they don't always have the same pronunciation as they would in Hebrew. Into the hell of fire, to Puros. Remember Pur and Puros. Pur is the third declension, neuter nominative of fire, Pur, Pur, and Puros is the genitive singular. In Mark 2, verse 3, and they came, or they are coming, present tense, they are coming, carrying to him a paralytic, a man paralyzed. Being lifted up by four, and then what they're doing is they're lifting him up. Four men are lifting him up. Tessaron are four. Four men of four by four. Remember who Paul often gives us the agent. Who is doing it? Because it's the paralytic that is the subject, and the action in the passive voice happens to the subject. But it describes the paralytic. So we have an adjectival participle, describes him as being lifted up, and he's lifted up onto the roof, where they will tear down the roof or tear apart the roof and let him down to Jesus. In that same story, and Edom, when Jesus saw their faith, I've always found this very interesting. He saw the faith of them. In other words, his friends, not the man here in view. When he saw their faith, he is saying, and now we want to pay attention because this present tense, HP, historical present tense, is leading us to his main statement. He says, he is saying to the paralytic, child, teknon, interesting expression, child, are forgiven your sins. Present, indicative, passive. Here we have an indicative again, but I thought it's worth using this one as an example of how the passive voice is very common. Your sins are being forgiven. Or I think here we have a simple present, your sins are forgiven. Matthew 5:13, you, plural, you are the salt, halas, teskes, of the earth. If the salt, moranthe, has lost its, has become impure, it has lost its flavor, it's no longer salt, presumably because some other chemicals have come in contact with it, there's a chemical reaction with the salt, and the salt is no longer real salt. Just as we can be deceived and even our faith destroyed by wrong things, by idols in particular. So we must watch out for things that defile the salt, if we're going to be the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. If the salt has lost its flavor, how is it? Will it be salty? That's how we translate this verse. Halis with halas, salt. Halis thes etai. This is a future passive. How will it be salted? Future passive. How will it be salted? Unto nothing. It is strong, it is able, it is valuable, it is worth. Iskuo is normally a verb of strength. And in a sense, the salt is losing its strength. It's losing its ability to do anything. Unto nothing it is strong, except Lathen exo katapatesthai, present infinitive passive. Hupo ton anthropon. Notice we have hupo with the genitive giving us the agent, because the subject is the salt. Back here, halas, and we're still talking about the salt. The salt is good for nothing except blethen, being thrown, being cast, except it's aorist, aorist passive. Notice the theta, blethen, and this is an aorist passive, a neuter participle. It's neuter because to halas is neuter, so it goes together with halas. Outside, exo, katapatesthai, to be trampled upon, to be walked upon. Kata is very often a preposition of destructive, some kind of destructive force. Katelabin, the darkness could not put out the light. John 1:5. Kata, it's added here to the verb pateo, to walk, but kata pateo means to trample upon, negative. But notice aorist passive infinitive. Kata patesthai, blethen. And I suppose it's perfective action with the aorist and the aorist passive infinitive, most likely here. It is being worth nothing except perhaps one time thrown out and one time taken in the action as a whole to be trampled by men. Looking at, we were primarily looking at participles. I'll try to go passive. I'll try to go faster now. We were primarily looking at infinitives. Now, quickly, participles, passive participles, the present participle passive, lu omenos, and this is actually a section from your personal notebook. So if you are smart, you can take this example from my presentation, because you will get the main slides of this in week 7 as documentation to help you with the lectures. And then we have the accusative masculine lu omenon, genitive singular lu omenu, dative singular lu omeno, and the forms in the present passive, present participle passive, remember. Actually, the middle and the passive are the same, but it's good to review and look at them again in the in this section on participles. 2 Corinthians 3:13, and talking about Moses. Moses placed etethe, or was placing a veil upon his own face, he altu, his own. Not just his, but his own face. Moses was placing, imperfect, was placing a veil upon his own face in order, in this case, pros is used as to give a purpose statement. Pros to, in order not to show to the sons of Israel pros takes the genitive, pros takes the accusative case. But it also makes this whole phrase into a purpose statement in order not to cause or to make visible, to show the sons of Israel into the end of that which was going away. Katargomenu, that which is going away. We have a present participle here. All of this is expressed, or much of this, in imperfective action, except for this aorist infinitive, in order not to show to the sons of Israel the end of that which was fading away, that which technically is fading away. But if we translate into English, we can't get across that present tense of the participle, which in view of the aorist infinitive here, probably has a special meaning that he uses the present tense participle instead of the aorist tense participle. In other words, this is imperfective action, this is imperfective action, and this is perfective action. This action is completed from the view of the author, and this action is going on, is not complete. Moses was placing a veil, and the end is in the process of going away. Of course, here Paul is talking about the fact that Moses went into the tabernacle, and when he came out, his face was radiant, and he put a veil over it. When you read the Old Testament story, it seems it's emphasizing the radiance of being in the tent with God. But when you read this, you realize that Paul is also bringing out that he put a veil over his face, so they wouldn't see that also faded away when he came out. And so they did not see, or they could not continue seeing the glory, and they couldn't see it fade away. And he is talking about, to one sense, the law is in the process of fading away because the law cannot accomplish salvation. And this morning in my own Bible reading, I read this by faith, piste. Piste introduces different characters in Hebrews chapter 11. Pistu kalumenos, Abraham, upe kusin ex elthin, estapon hon emelen, lambanen es kleomamion, kai ex elthin me epistamenos pu erchetai. By faith, Abraham was called. Abraham is called, present participle. Abraham is called by faith. And Abraham obeyed. While being called. I guess that's the idea. As soon as he heard the call, he obeyed. To go out, present tense infinitive, unto the place which he was about to receive, present infinitive, unto an inheritance. And he went out, not understanding where he is going. It is interesting, the choice of tenses. In the imperfective action here, he is going, he is in the process. He is being called, present passive participle, and the perfective action, he obeyed. And he went out, aorist tense here. So we have some aorist tenses, but we also have some imperfective action here. Amelin, he was being about to be receiving, lambanen, present tense. Very fascinating, the juxtaposition, we say, the placing of tenses of perfective action with imperfective action. Kalumenos, imperfective action, a present passive participle, being Abraham being called. When he was called, he obeyed. There's no after he was called, he obeyed, but when he was called, he obeyed. The sense seems to almost be immediately. To go out, ex elthin, perfective action. And I said I was going to go faster. Aorist participle passive. Quickly, the aorist participle active. This is taken from the personal notebook, and I've supplied some additional forms of the aorist participle nominative masculine, and this is the active voice. This is all active voice, feminine, neuter. Active voice, aitesas. Aorist participle, aitesasa, aitesan. Agapes as, agapes asa, agapes an. Again, all of these are active, aorist active participles with the aorist agag on. Notice of ago, agag. Gag, this is the stem, aorist stem of ago. Apothnesco, apoth, I remember, is a second aorist, a strong aorist. Apethanon is the aorist indicative active. I died. The one who died. Apothanon. The lady who died. Apothanusa. The dog or the child in neuter, apothanon. And so you can look here on this chart with these examples of verbs at the aorist participle, nominative, masculine, feminine, neuter, and the active. Now, when we go to the middle voice, we actually are skipping to chapter 28. And you don't have to know the middle forms yet, but it's just interesting to put them here so that you remember that the aorist passive is different from the aorist middle. It is not like the present tense. The present tense middle and passive form, passive voices have the same form. So you can only have to try from the, you have to try from the context to decide if the verb is middle or if it is passive voice. Not so with the aorist tense. There is an aorist middle participle, lus amenos. Notice the sigma, the sign of the aorist stem. This is not the indicative mode, we're in participles. So lusamenos, loose, not loose. And notice also typical for the aorist, the alpha vowel. And then menos is also typical of middle or passive forms. In the aorist, it's the middle, lusamenos, lusamene, lusamenon, feminine and neuter. And then the accusative, genitive, and dative forms that go with the masculine, feminine, and neuter aorist middle. The aorist middle participles plurals, lusamenoi, lusamenai, lusamena, referring in the middle voice, maybe reflexive. These, the ones who are loosing for themselves. Perhaps that would be the sense of this expression, lusamenoi, but we don't know unless we have the context, if that is indeed the correct translation. We are just looking at the forms and remembering that these are middle forms. Aorist stem and the sa and menoi, leading us to the middle passive, not active, not the active participle, but the middle participle. Hebrews 6 verse 13. For to Abraham God proclaimed good news. Or God was a good news proclaimer. I guess that's the way. God, the good news proclaimer. It's used here in an adjectival way, describing God as the good news proclaimer, using the aorist middle participle, epangelamenos. God proclaimed good news. God was a good news proclaimer to Abraham. And then it goes on to describe that he swore by himself, because there was no one greater by whom he could swear his promise, that his seed would be many, many, many people, the sand on the sea. His obedience to God would lead to great blessing for countless people. And so it has been. Abraham's faith is still the faith that we must have today in God. God announced good news to him. So the good news is also in the Old Testament. Epangelizomai, announcing good news. A aorist middle participle. The aorist participle passive is different from the aorist middle participle. Not like the present participle passive. The present passive participle and the middle forms are the same. So again, we have to have the context with the present middle and passive participles, but not with the aorist participle passive and middle. The middle form we just looked at, it's very much different. Lusamenos. We have theta, this typical consonant that goes with the ending, with added to make the stem, we can say, for the aorist passive participle. Luthes, luthesa, luthen, luthenta, and the accusative singular. Luthesan, luthen. Same, typical of course, the neuter, that the accusative and the nominative and accusative have the same form. Same in the plural, luthenta, luthenta. Something is happening to someone generally. Someone was washed. Loosed. I'm always thinking of, there's another verb close to luo in the New Testament for wash, but luo means loose, obviously. Someone was loosed. It happened to someone. The person who was loosed, the lady who was loosed, most likely, or some feminine object. The child who was loosed. Paidion, Luthen. We have examples, many examples of aorist passive participle, as here in 1 Peter 3:22. Speaking of Christ, who is at the right hand, this Greek uses the preposition in, we would say at the right hand of God. having gone into heaven. But poruomai is a deponent verb, we say. So this passive form of poruomai, I'm going to translate. Remember that back in chapter 9, Dr. McIver says that some verbs are active in translation, but passive in their forms. Most deponent verbs, as we call them, are middle in their forms, but he gave a couple of examples, one of them being poruomai, another one being phobeomai, to fear, poruomai, to go, and here we would say, having gone, after he went, who is at the right hand of God, after he went into heaven. So we're going to take this as an adverbial participle, agreeing with Haas, but as a temporal participle after he went into heaven, and the angels and the authorities and the powers obey him. Hupotagento. Again, don't forget that we have the genitive absolute sometimes, especially in the narrative portions of the New Testament. And notice here we can have the aorist passive participle in a genitive absolute phrase. Now, when Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea, after Jesus was born passive, genao, but this is the aorist passive participle of genao, genethentos, and we'll take it as adverbial temporal. Genitive absolute phrases are generally temporal in nature, and we have all the elements of a genitive absolute. We have a noun in this genitive, and we have a participle in the genitive beginning the sentence at the beginning. That's when we usually find them. So we call this phrase in the genitive form a genitive absolute. After Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the days of Herod the king, look, magi from. So we are supposed to look particularly at these people coming, the magoi. Perfect participle passive. We've had the perfect tense, and we know that the sign of the perfect tense is reduplication. So lelumenos, this is typical passive. In the present tense, it's middle and passive, but and I believe so also in the perfect. It is also middle and passive, but it's never active. So when we see menos, mene, or menon, or some form close to that, meno here with the dative, when we see menos on the end, we are pretty sure we have a passive, we have our middle or passive form. And when we have reduplication, we are pretty sure we have a perfect form. And all of this together, lelumenos, we have a perfect participle passive. The one who was, the one who has been loosed, to try to translate the perfect passive participle. And this would be feminine, a lady has been loosed, and perhaps a child has been loosed, lelumenon, referring to paidion, or some other neuter noun. So the perfect, and that's of course talking about adjectival participles. These could be used as adverbial participles, and then they may not. But even then, there may be some person or object in the sentence to which it refers, even if it has an adverbial usage. And if you don't know what I mean when I say adverbial and adjectival usage, you need to go back and read KMP, which we read about the usage of the participle. What are the uses of the participle? We talked about this, reviewing this semester, the forms of participles. In Greek 3, we concentrated on the forms of the participle, but now in Greek 4, we also concentrated on how participles are used. What does it mean when we say they are used adjectival? What does it mean when we say they are used adverbial? And what is a periphrastic participle? You should not fear them. This is a deponent, but it is an aorist passive indicative. You shall not fear them, for nothing has been hidden. Kekalumenon. Nothing has been hidden. Perfect passive participle. Neuter, nothing, no thing, is well, actually, we have a perfect periphrastic participle here, don't we? Sorry. There is nothing that has been hidden, emphasizing the action that it was hidden, but it is still right now staying hidden. The periphrastic tends to emphasize the aspect of the verb form, which will not be revealed. Future passive indicative will not be revealed. And hidden, krypton, now it switches to the present tense of in this participle, krypton, also neuter, which will not be made known or will not be known. So everything about our lives, things that we hide, we don't hide from God. Everything will become known, which ought to make us live our lives more intensely and watchfully. John 3, verse 8. Thus, for thus is everyone, everyone, pasapon, pas is masculine singular, everyone who has been born, perfect participle, perfect participle passive form. Genao, perfect form, who has been born from the Spirit. Thus is everyone who has been born of the Holy Spirit. John 3, verse 8. Luke 23, 25. Speaking of, I think here it is talking about the criminal that he released, Barabbas, that's his name. Barabbas, who was released just before Jesus was crucified. And he let go, now he let go the one rebellion and insurrection. These are two similar words. Because of rebellion and insurrection, dia, and then the accusative, because of rebellion and had been thrown into prison. And Jesus he delivered over to their will, thelemati, to dated case, to their will. But notice the perfect passive participle of balo, veble menon, he who had been thrown Esfulakin, into prison. Now, the last part of our session here, part 3, I want to emphasize the principal parts. We just looked at the verb ginao, so it's worthwhile to notice the principal parts. The principal parts, again, are the first person singular, the dictionary form, as it were, starting with here, the ginao. We always have an extra column. The English translation does not really belong in the principal parts, but we should put it here so we remember what the verb means. But the principal parts are the future, first person singular, the aorist indicative first person singular, the perfect indicative first person singular, the perfect passive indicative first person singular, and the aorist passive first person indicative first person singular indicative. It's always the first person singular, and it's always the indicative voice, because from the indicative mood we can form all the other forms. But knowing these helps us to know the irregularities, because many verbs have irregular forms. So if I know the principal parts, I know which verbs are irregular. And notice again that the aorist active and the perfect active come here, and then because the perfect active is here, the perfect passive is placed beside it, and the aorist passive is the last of the principal parts that's mentioned. Notice theta eta, the sign of the aorist passive, especially, at least the theta, and often theta eta, especially in the indicative mode. Now, in your personal notebook, I have put the verbs, the principal parts that you should know. And in McIver, also in Appendix C, are the ones you should know. We will have an extra exam on principal parts before we end this semester. And generally, one could say, if you know all of the principal parts in Appendix C, you're probably an A student. If you know the principal parts that there's a second level, actually, the ones that must be known are the C students. The ones that should be known are the B students, and all the main principal parts listed in Appendix C, those are the A students. So if you're aiming to get an A in this semester, in this course, you need to know all of the principal parts in Appendix C. Notice, for example, balo. We've seen this verb a lot in our examples. Balo. Future is baleo. We will look at that next week. The aorist is a second aorist. And balo has a second aorist. Ebalon. I threw. I throw. Balo. I threw. Or I was throwing. Or I began to. No, sorry. This is the aorist. Sorry. Ebalon. I threw. Be bleka. I have thrown. Perfect tense. Be blamai, I had been thrown. Notice we're in the passive form. And eblathin, I was thrown. I had been thrown, perfect passive. I was thrown, aorist passive. Eblathin, theta eta, sign of the aorist passive. So take each of these verbs and notice that which ones are irregular. Like ginosko, its forms are not regular, like, for example, luo. Or didomi, these me verbs change. And don't confuse dodeca, 12, the word for 12, with doka, the perfect active of didomi, I have given. dedoka. Dodeca. Dodeca is in your vocabulary, it means 12, but dedoka means I have given. So Appendix C, these list the principal parts that I would say here A students will know. People, those who are very active and have really done their work well, those A students will know these principal parts, all of them. And that makes it much easier to read the New Testament when you know all of these principal parts, because when you meet these verb forms, for example, erchomai and elusomai, the future, elphon, elelutha, I have come. When you notice these irregular forms, you know which verb they belong to. And so we come to the end. It's been a long journey here in chapter 24.2, but I hope it has been helpful. Again, we will keep reviewing the participle forms, and we will keep reviewing the passive forms. Knowing the passive voice, action happening to the subject. Sometimes we have deponent verbs that we translate actively, but we have a lot of them that the action happens to the subject, and then hupo tastes and gives us the agent by who did it, or hupoton, genitive plural, by strangers or by whomever who did the action to the subject. So the action is not, the subject is not doing the action. The action is happening to the subject. John is not hitting the ball in the passive voice. John was hit by the ball. John was the one who was hit. So the action happened to John. This is the force of the passive voice. So I hope you have a good lesson and good exercises in your homework this week. This ends our lectures on the passive voice. Next week, we will look at the future tense in chapter 25.